Alright, currently we have a working dynamic form that can be created from JSON config that is loaded from some API. It supports also validation and a couple of control types. And I think it is cool. And if you need to deal with small forms like this one, the current implementation overall might be okay for you. But usually in real projects, you have to deal with massive forms with a lot of controls and groups. And if we have a look at our current implementation, we can see that scaling and maintaining with this current architecture might be problematic. And let's try to figure out why. As I mentioned in the previous video, we don't touch the refactoring of error messages because we will do it separately. The only thing is that error messages are tightly coupled with this dynamic container, so let's move them out of it. But let's get back to the dynamic form implementation. Well, here the design bottleneck is exactly this part where we create a control based on its type. Currently it looks quite lean, but on another side we just have two types of form controls and they might be way more complex rather than we have right now. So very quickly this part might be bloated and become unmaintainable. My idea is to extract each control type into separate components and create those components dynamically in a component outlet. So in such a way we will be able to extract the control resolving logic from the view. So let's currently comment out this template, and next to it I'm going to create another ng container with the ng component outlet directive applied, which allows us actually to create components dynamically, and we can do it in declarative way. It comes with common modules, so make sure that it is imported into your component or module. All right. What this directive needs in order to render a component? Well, it needs a component class constructor. We don't have those component classes right now, so let's create them first, and after that I'm going to create a service that will resolve the component constructors for the specific control type. So in the terminal, I will run the following command that will generate a component for the input control. And I make styles and templates in line in order to have everything in one file, to not, jumping around between files because it might distract you. So here we go. And let's immediately do the same thing, but for a select control component. And done. Then I told you that we need some resolver that will be resolving a proper component depending on the control type, right? So let's create it as well, and I name it like dynamic control resolver. Awesome. Now we have everything to proceed. So let's go to our newly created resolver, and firstly let's maybe remove the service suffix to make the name shorter and cleaner. And secondly, I'm going to create a private property that will contain an object where the key is going to be one of the strings from control type, right? And the value is a constructor of any class. By the way, this type generic that comes from Angular core, it defines exactly the class constructor type, just for you to know. Great, and now let's maybe extract it into a separate type alias and name it somehow like, I don't know, dynamic control map. Great, so now if I hover over it, you can see what the shape of this object must be. All right, now let's add the required fields to this object. For example, for the input key, I will assign the dynamic input control that we created a minute ago. And for the select, it will be obviously a dynamic select class constructor. Awesome. Now let's create a public method that will be resolving the proper component. This method will receive a control type, and its type should be equal to one of the keys from dynamic control map, right? So at this point, it can be either an input or select. And there it just returns the class constructor where the map key matches the provided control type. just like that. Okay, looks great so far. Now we are ready to use this resolver in our component, so let's copy it and inject it inside our dynamic forms page component, somewhere right next to the injected HTTP client service. Once we have it injected, I can go to the template and call the resolve method of this service and provide the control type that needs to be resolved. So based on that, there will be resolved the proper component class, and in such a way, ng-component-outlet directive will know which component needs to be dynamically bootstrapped. Now we can check if it works, and you can see that actually everything works fine. Yeah, those control components are empty so far, but the components themselves were properly resolved and instantiated, which is the first step in our migration process. And for now, I suggest you to commit this step, and the rest we will implement in the second part, because it will be too much for one video. So let's take a short break and see you in the next video.